Windows sucks, macOS sucks, everything sucks other than Linux. And as you can see, I am a proper Linux user now who does not care about personal hygiene, and I haven't seen the sun in over 3 weeks. This isn't the sun, this is just lighting. Oh, so stupid. Okay, so there's been a lot of talk about Windows 11 now that Windows 10 has been sunsetted and all the AI and ads that are over there and people hating it. And there's a lot of talk about macOS, made by Apple, who is the premier designer of all things hardware and software, who can't even align icons properly anymore. And then there's the hype of Omarchy.
The pronunciation, is Omarchy.
Look, thanks for the distro, David, but just like we tell Uno when they tell us that you can't put a +2 on a +2, we'll take it from here. Omarchy has gotten a lot of hype, and with all of this chatter going on, I figured I'd share my 2 cents as someone who has coded on macOS and Windows of various versions, as well as Ubuntu on VM and via WSL2 and via native and via Omakube, as well as a custom Arch Linux Rice. To be fair, I did base it on somebody else's .files. And as many of y'all know, NixOS, highly do not recommend. And I've coded on a couple other random distros for fun. So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this, and that's all this is going to be. My thoughts, my experience, not, hey, look at these benchmarks or definitive facts as to why one operating system is better than another for software development, except for the others being better than Windows, because obviously, unless you're using WSL2, which the others still are better because WSL2 has a couple of quirks, but it's pretty nice, I'm not gonna lie. So let's go back in time a little over a decade now to when young Forrest was learning software development. I had just built my first custom PC. I installed Windows 8 using a key from an old laptop because of course I'm not going to pay $100 for a Windows key. And I just used it however my professors told me to use it. I installed NetBeans for Java development, where I built what's almost exclusively terminal applications. But at the same time, I had a mid-2012 MacBook Pro that I was learning iOS development on. And this is where I first really saw the difference between some sort of Unix-like based, officially Unix operating system like macOS, which was actually called OS X at the time, and Windows, with the backslashes versus the forward slashes, with the different ways you would interact with your code via Git, running different commands, doing it all in an IDE or via the terminal, as well as the ease of SSHing into something on OS X versus needing to install something like Sigwin or however you pronounce it. Although once you installed that, it did make it pretty easy. So of course, with all of this, I heavily lean towards almost exclusively using my MacBook with OS X for software development. That is until I learned about virtual machines using OracleBox on Windows. And once I got my first software engineering job, that is what I used exclusively. Virtual machine on Windows with Ubuntu, just base, stable Ubuntu installed. And let me tell you, it worked flawlessly. If you want to get into Linux and you want it to just all work, Ubuntu stable is my personal recommendation for that. It's just so nice. And you'll hear 1,000 different opinions from 1,000 different people. This is just one of them, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think it's a pretty common one. Ubuntu is a very good gateway drug into Linux. And with this, I was able to do everything that I needed to do. I used Eclipse, I know, not IntelliJ, but Eclipse at the time because I didn't want to cost my employer any more money, even though he offered to buy me IntelliJ. And that was for Java, Spring, backend development. And then I would have Angular TypeScript open on the front end in VS Code. And I would have both of these open basically at all times. And then of course I would have Jira open as well, and Bitbucket open as well, and a litany of other things. I've made videos on all of the stuff that I used to use, but that's the type of development I did on the Ubuntu VM, and I don't recall ever running into any major problems. And speaking of remote access, like with the SSH, I utilized OpenVPN in the Ubuntu VM in order to access the data that I needed for the development work that I was doing. But as many of you know, I unfortunately use Adobe services, so my personal machine always had Windows on it. Eventually, whatever year, it updated to Windows 10. And at some point in the beginning of 2022, I tried out WSL 2. I don't recall if I ever tried out WSL proper, but I never stuck with it. And WSL 2, WSL stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux, although technically wouldn't it be a Linux subsystem for Windows? I mean, if you really think about it, that makes more sense, but that's neither here nor there. And at this point, my mid-2012 MacBook had been retired for probably 4 years. I think I stopped using this thing in like 2018, but don't want to get rid of it because it's special to me. It's my first ever computer. And I'm not much of a sticker man, but all of these stickers are on here because they're covering up dents underneath them. But before hopping into all the things about WSL2, I realized I forgot an operating system from back in 2020 when I first installed Arch Linux, which I installed on a custom-built PC, which I got the components from Micro Center, the sponsor of this portion of today's video. And if you're watching this video in November, Micro Center just opened a brand new store in Phoenix, Arizona. So if you live anywhere near there, definitely check it out because they have some ridiculous grand opening deals going on right now. For everyone else, like me, November is basically a constant rotation of really good sales going on at Micro Center, with each week having a new theme, new hardware drops, new discounts. And so it's worth checking the site regularly at the link at the top of the description. And I know I don't have to brag about Micro Center to you, because if you're anything like me, you already know how awesome it is, but I'm going to anyway. They just won in the PC Mag's 2025 Reader's Choice Awards, Best Tech Retailer, Best Brick and Mortar Tech Store, and Best Big Box Store. Pretty much a full sweep. And rightfully so, if you ask me, although I may be a little bit biased. The only thing they still need to do is put a store near me, please. But whether you're able to shop that grand opening in Phoenix, or you have a store near you, or you're like me and don't have one near you, you can check out all of their deals regardless online using the link in the top of the description. Check it out. Now, this is my first foray into custom Linux, not just install Ubuntu and it works, but instead going through and actually ricing the system, which I did and I played around with a lot before. I eventually found another guy's dot files, which were effectively exactly what I was trying to build. So I took those, changed a couple things, and made them my own. But this was my first run-in with audio issues that didn't really make any sense. And then trying to figure out how to hook up my computer, my operating system, to Wi-Fi, because I had to install something else for that. And the reason I say it didn't make any sense is because everything leading up until that point, it just worked. I mean, Windows has its quirks, but it still works. Same with macOS, same with Ubuntu, even Ubuntu on a virtual machine. But Arch Linux was different, and it was cooler. I literally disappeared off the internet for many months just to go ahead, create a custom Arch Linux RICE, and then build some machine learning, artificial intelligence, code bullet-esque projects and make videos about those. Though, of course, without any of the humor that Code Bullet has, because I can never match that humor, nor would I ever try. It's just not me. But again, still tied or handcuffed to Adobe, so it was dual booted on my PC. I had Windows 10 on one partition and Arch Linux on the other partition, and then I had a dedicated hard drive in order to save all of the video footage from Arch Linux onto that hard drive that both operating systems could access. And I don't recall the exact RICE of what I did on Arch Linux, but I know for a fact I did use Awesome for the window manager. And I had all of this written down here, so I assume this was either what I was going to do or it's what I did. Window switcher and app launcher was Rofi. Compositor was PyCom, but a different type. It was TryOne's PyCom fork, which was previously a Compton fork. And I could be wrong on this, but I think the only reason I went this route is because I wanted the dual Kaways blur, or however you pronounce that, because I thought it looked cool. That's it. Display manager was LightDM, shell was ZSH, terminal emulator was Kitty, web browser was Firefox, file manager was Thunar, brightness control was brightness control, volume control was PA mixer, spawn key combo was X.tool, and status bar was Polybar, which I really liked. Again, I forget if that was from one of my previous builds of what I wanted to do but couldn't get it to work, or what I ended up with at the end of it. And while it looked cool, and it did so many things, and I was able to just customize everything, which I guess in theory I could on Ubuntu, but it was very forced on Arch Linux because you had to do it. It really made me appreciate the plug and play nature of the other operating systems. It's very much a give and a take. Pros and cons of each one you control entirely. That's Arch Linux, but with you controlling it entirely, you have to ensure that you do everything. Audio issues, you gotta go fix it. Change your keyboard layout, instead of just clicking a button, you gotta go into the actual code, some sort of file, and change it. However, the Arch Wiki is the absolute best wiki I have ever read on operating systems or otherwise. It is the source for not only Arch users, but also other Linux users because it's so vast while being specific and being incredibly useful. So it can go stretch across many different Linux distros because it's so good. And there's so much more I can say about Arch Linux, but eventually I ended up saying, I'm just going to redo my entire Arch Linux rice, and I'm going to delete the dual partition, reformat everything with a fresh Windows 10 install. And then on another computer, I was going to do a new custom Arch Linux rice, but I never did. Instead, that is when I tried out WSL2 for the first time after being against it for 6 years. I believe it released in 2016. I tried it for the first time in 2022. And WSL is a way to run a GNU/Linux environment directly in Windows without the overhead of a virtual machine like I used to have or dual booting like I used to have. My dog is not a fan of Windows. Every time I mention it, she barks. So you could use your command line tools, your utilities, your applications that you're used to without the stupid backslashes that for some reason Windows has yet to change. And WSL2 on Windows gives you the best of both worlds. So I can use all of the Windows apps or the software that needs Windows to run while also utilizing the Linux terminal and still writing code within that Linux experience. And the beautiful thing about it is that if I open VS Code in Windows, it automatically runs in WSL Ubuntu, as you can see right here. All you do is connect to WSL using distro, Ubuntu, HTML right here. It's pro dev stuff. You wouldn't get it. And you know what's funny? With all of the AI stuff lately, which I know I've been a part of, but I'm just trying to help people understand how I think it's proper to use AI and not just completely rely on it. This is some of the more fun. This and another project I'm working on where I'm just like in the code. It's HTML, it's not really code, but you get what I'm saying. Has been some of the most fun, and just throwing everything in body directly with a couple of breaks and then throwing it on GitHub pages and hosting it there, which didn't go down when US East 1 went down because GitHub's owned by Microsoft. So presumably GitHub Pages is on Azure, and then setting up my own custom domain to it. It is just, it takes me back. It takes me back to when I first did it like 10 years ago now, which I'm pretty sure was the very first video on my channel. Yes, it is. You can see forestnight.github.io with my resume website. You can build one 100% free. And I, by the way, hate this right here. What does having a 75% skill of Java mean? It doesn't mean anything. Oh, and this was in the days when I did more C++ than Java. Look at that. I was better at C++ than Java. And there you are. There's me with my old PC, as you can see down here. These were the days. All bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, just ready to conquer the software development world, liking my own videos. I don't do that anymore. And I'm even doing this in GitHub desktop because I wanted to be accessible to everyone and didn't want them to be intimidated by the CLI. And I did it in Notepad++, which I have absolutely no clue why, because I never coded in Notepad++. Man, those were the days, I ain't gonna lie. Anyway, enough of the distraction. I was talking about WSL2, and there are a few quirks though. It's not like just completely native Unix, Linux type of systems, because when I was doing some Expo development, which is mobile development earlier this year, inside of VS Code in WSL Ubuntu. In order to get it to properly work and display on the computer, I went down this long line of research to try to figure it out. And I had to do a tunnel flag, I guess, to tunnel out of WSL into Windows. At least that's how I interpret it and remember it. So that's what I'm going to say. Otherwise, it didn't work. And then when I was building a Chrome extension, in order to get it over to the store, I had to have it on Windows, but all of my code is on WSL. So then I just copied that entire code base over from WSL onto Windows, which is a great use case for artificial intelligence. I think I used Warp for it, but I didn't feel like typing in all of the directories and subdirectories and things of that nature in Linux and then all the folders in Windows. So I just said, hey, take this code base, copy it into documents folder over here, and it did it on its own. But then for every single update that I made, I had to copy it over. Maybe there's an easier way, but that was the easiest workaround that I found. And so that's just what I continued to do, because then from there is where it updates the Chrome extensions on Chrome. And if I ever need to reload it because I added some code to it, it would pull from that folder on Windows, not WSL. There's also some networking quirks that I've run into and some system level things that just don't work right because it's not truly Linux. Oh, and not to mention, I have found that there is a heavier memory footprint with WSL2. I don't know if this is normal, if it's just me, if this is kind of expected, but it happens. But I have been using WSL2 primarily for the past 3 years. And oh yeah, that previous distraction we had was because I opened up this file and talking about the good old days and GitHub pages and things of that nature. But really, I was talking about how I open this up and boom, it's WSL Ubuntu. If not, I can always just go ahead and use it. But that's the same for basically anything. So IntelliJ IDEA as well, and Warp, and of course, Microsoft's own terminal, which I have set to automatically open in WSL Ubuntu. But of course, you can open PowerShell, command prompt, all this stuff. On WSL, I've done a lot of different types of development. I mainly use VS Code, WSL Ubuntu, and a lot of web development type stuff, front end, back end, TypeScript type ecosystem. And then I've dabbled with Expo, mobile development, and a handful of other types. Obviously, I still do Java stuff. And a lot of times I've been doing Java in VS Code, call me crazy. I never do any sort of development that isn't on WSL while I'm on Windows. But now we're running into a little issue. As you can see, I am on Windows 10 and we just hit end of life. No more support for Windows 10. You gotta update to Windows 11 and you have to have all of the AI and ads and giving all of your information over to Windows, whatever else it entails, over to Microsoft to be specific, as if they don't already have all of your information because they own VS Code as well as GitHub, as well as TypeScript, as well as think about anything, as well as Azure and anything else you can think of. They probably own it. OpenAI effectively. And of course, Windows, so they just have all your data. And speaking of which, I have another new computer. Don't ask me why, because I don't know why, but this one has Windows 11. An operating system that I do not plan to keep. I just need to find the time to learn Premiere alternative, Photoshop alternative, which I'm thinking DaVinci and Figma. And then I also use Lightroom and, well, really just those three. Because even with Wine, it doesn't work on Linux. But that's not the end, because I also have a mini PC over here, as many of y'all have seen, that used to run NixOS, which I made a whole entire video on why I don't like NixOS. And I did make a comment about how this is probably a skill issue. But in reality, if I have to spend the better part of a year learning how to efficiently learn an operating system, and when I say the better part of a year, I mean alongside all of the other work that I do, because I can't just take 3 months off like I did when I did my Arch Linux Rice and built the AI stuff all back in 2020, because I have more responsibilities nowadays and I just need something that works. So after setting up what I thought was a super cool Rice, I mean, it had Hyperland, it had Rofi Wayland and Waybar, unless I'm reading the wrong thing. And I was thinking about HyperPanel, but it's written in TypeScript and I wasn't so sure about it. And I made a whole video about that and I really, really loved the way it worked. I loved the cleanliness, the structure of the NixOS file there that had everything that I have, the config file, but it just wasn't for me at the time. And frankly, while declarative cool, how many times am I going to be duplicating the same operating system again and again and again? This is coming from somebody with, I think I have 9 computers in this room, and I don't even do that. And the other thing about NixOS is that IDE as well as GPU support is selective. Or in other words, a lot of them don't exist. And many that do are just like user generated, not even like official. So it's always going to be behind the official releases if that person continues to actually update it. Not a fan. So what I ended up doing on the same mini PC is completely nixing NixOS and then installing Ubuntu with Omakube, which if you don't know what Omakube is, it is the precursor, if you will, to Omarky by DHH, or in his own words, an Omakaze developer setup for Ubuntu 2404 Plus by DHH. I don't know if I pronounced this word correctly, but I made a video all about that one as well. And if I were to compare the Omakube on Ubuntu and just raw Ubuntu, Omakube is really just if you like that specific rice and opinions. Just straight up stable LTS Ubuntu, whatever it is when you're watching this video, is awesome, just as it is. And you can make a lot of the changes that Omakube or Omarky have to Ubuntu or any other Linux distro that you want to use. And if you've heard of Omarky, Omakube is to Ubuntu as Omarky is to Arch Linux. Although I wasn't here at the initial development for Omakube, and it feels like Omarky is very prioritized, if you will, which may be what I install on that machine over there, but I'm going to install it on a VM to see how I like it. To see if it's too opinionated for me, to see how similar it is to Omakube, because I do like a lot of the things about it. But Omarky eliminates a lot of those issues that I previously said that I had with my custom Arch Linux rice, from the audio issues to a handful of other minor things that just felt clunky, like hooking up something with Bluetooth or hooking up Wi-Fi. So what I'm going to figure out after installing Omarky on a VM is it a good launch point for stripping down what I don't want or need and then making my own version of it? Or is it too far off from what I want to where it just makes sense that I do a custom Arch Linux rice? That's where I'm at right now with operating systems, which is very up in the air. But the thing about Arch Linux is effectively what I have said in previous videos about NixOS. Mainly the reason why I'm no longer using NixOS is that while the benefit is that you control every package, every service, and config, is that you control every package and service and config. And when one thing goes wrong, which is actually kind of frequent, you have to spend the time to manually fix every single thing. So I love it, but if you're just really trying to get work done, there's a time sync element that you have to account for. So overall, what did I learn coding on all of these different operating systems is that Windows is as much of a headache as you would expect. However, WSL2 has alleviated most of those headaches. To be completely honest with you, it works with, of course, those few quirks, but what operating system doesn't have those? macOS, while I haven't used it in many years, I did always like it. It is officially Unix certified. So if you want to call it Unix-like, Unix-based Unix, I guess you're not technically wrong. And of course, it's always going to be on great hardware. Apple is great at making hardware. You're in a closed garden in that ecosystem. If you like that, roll with it. In Linux, you have your pick. Just know the difference between going with something like Ubuntu or Omakube or Omarky, which are basically more or less plug and play, and going with something like NixOS or just raw Arch Linux, where you have to build everything up yourself, which all in all, the beginning and throughout, will include a time sync. So that's up to you. That's all I got for today. Y'all have a good one.